When Daniel moved into the old duplex on Hemlock Street, it wasn't because he loved the place. It was cheap, that's all. The paint peeled like sunburnt skin, the porch sagged, and the neighbors kept to themselves in a way that felt more like wariness than disinterest. But for someone like Daniel, 37, recently divorced, scraping together a freelance living, it was enough. A place to disappear, temporarily. The previous tenant had left in a hurry. The landlord, a balding man with a vague Eastern European accent, said only that the guy had too many personal troubles. The locks had been changed, the floor cleaned, and that was the end of it. Daniel, who wasn't much of a people person to begin with, didn't ask further. He had just moved in with 2 suitcases and a box of coffee mugs. The first week was uneventful. His days were quiet, filled with proofreading, legal transcripts, and microwaving frozen meals. The place creaked more than he liked, especially at night, but it was an old house. Old houses make noise. He told himself that repeatedly, especially when lying in bed, listening to faint tapping that always seemed to come from the same corner under the floor. He thought little of it. When he walked over that area, the floorboards felt slightly hollow, but not unstable. And he told himself, again and again, that it was just uneven construction. He'd rented far worse before. But what bothered him wasn't the sound, it was how rhythmic it became. Sometimes it even paused when he paused. But this was probably just his mind filling in patterns, he reasoned. The brain wants logic. It wants cause and effect. And Daniel, more than anyone, was prone to overthinking. His ex-wife used to call it analysis paralysis. She wasn't wrong. Still, there was something different about this quiet. Not the normal suburban hush, but a deep, insulating silence that seemed to press in at night. He chalked it up to stress and isolation. He was alone now, truly. No late-night texts, no shared dinners, no quiet snoring next to him. Just the steady, unnerving calm of a house that had learned to keep secrets. On the 7th night, as he sat at his desk, reviewing a deposition about a car crash, the lamp flickered. A coincidence, sure, but as he looked toward the window, he felt something, a subtle, almost imperceptible vibration in the floor beneath his feet. A pressure, like something shifting its weight directly below him. He stood up, telling himself it was nothing, just bad wiring, just old wood. But the house didn't answer. It only listened. The following morning, Daniel dismissed the sensation beneath his feet as nothing more than fatigue. He hadn't been sleeping well. He told himself it was normal. New environment, lingering thoughts of the divorce. The stress of making ends meet, it was enough to make anyone sensitive to small noises. But that explanation only held until the 8th night. It was just past midnight. Daniel sat cross-legged on his mattress, staring at the floor like it had spoken. The tapping had returned. But now, it wasn't random. It was measured. 3 slow knocks, then silence, then 3 again. As though someone or something was waiting for a response. He stood motionless in the dark, unsure whether to speak or to pretend it wasn't happening. A rational voice in his mind reminded him he was alone. No one had keys. The basement was sealed off with rusted bolts. The landlord had shown him on day 1 for safety, he'd said with a grin, too wide. Daniel hadn't questioned it. He hadn't cared. But now he did. He tiptoed to the kitchen and grabbed a flashlight. His breath misted faintly in the beam, though the heating was on. That was the first real signal that something was off. The cold wasn't coming from outside. It was seeping up from the floor itself. He crouched down, pressed his palm to the boards. They were vibrating. Not violently, no shaking, no cracking, but like a steady living heartbeat pulsing up through the foundation. And then it stopped. Just like that, no fade out, no slowing down. One moment it was there, and the next, gone. As though it had never happened. Daniel stayed there for a while, crouched like a child, listening for thunder, flashlight trembling in his grip. The next morning, he emailed the landlord. Weird noise under floorboards, he typed. Maybe a pipe. He didn't expect a response. Instead, 2 hours later, a message arrived. Do not try to open the floor. Some structures are unstable. Trust me, that was all. No greeting, no signature. Just those 3 lines, Daniel sat back in his chair and stared at the email. The phrasing was odd. Do not try to open the floor. He hadn't mentioned opening anything, just a noise, just a question. That night, he didn't sleep. He lay on the mattress, flashlight in hand, heart pounding in his throat, waiting. But the tapping never came. Instead, at 3:12 a.m., there was a new sound. Not below, inside, the walls, a breath. The sound wasn't loud. It wasn't even distinct. But Daniel knew what he heard. A slow exhale, just beyond the drywall, long and steady like someone trying not to be heard. He froze beneath his blanket, eyes locked on the seam where wall met ceiling, and he waited. No footsteps, no creaks, just breath. Then silence. He stayed awake until dawn. The next day, things changed. Not dramatically, no poltergeists or moving furniture, but in the smaller, stranger ways that make you question your mind. He would leave his keys on the kitchen counter and find them in the bathroom. The milk would spoil overnight, despite the fridge humming as usual. His clock radio never set, began flashing numbers at exactly 3:12 a.m. every time he unplugged and replugged it at work. Daniel tried to talk about it. He joked to his colleague, Mark, about his haunted floorboards. Mark laughed, then asked if Daniel was okay. That question stuck with him. He didn't remember the last time someone asked him that seriously. Maybe his ex-wife, just before. Everything fell apart. That night, Daniel placed his phone on the floor and recorded a voice memo while he slept. In the morning, he pressed play. The audio was mostly static, punctuated by soft shifts as he turned in bed. But at exactly 3:12 a.m., something else emerged, a whisper, faint, broken, almost mechanical. As if someone were speaking through a fan. He played it again. Slowed it down. This time he could almost make it out. ... leave ... floor ... It didn't make sense. Or maybe it did, and he didn't want it to. Still, part of him wanted answers. He returned to the email and wrote back, "What's under the floor?" No reply. 2 days passed. Then, a letter arrived, handwritten, no stamp, slid under his door. It said only, "Some doors should remain shut. Yours has no handle." Daniel didn't understand what that meant. But from that night on, the sounds grew louder. He'd hear fingers tapping behind the drywall, like they were trying to trace the studs from the inside out. At night, when he walked through the hall, the bulbs would dim, not flicker, but dim, like something breathing in the power. He tried to rationalize, to explain. He Googled old building layouts, gas leaks, animal infestations. But nothing matched. None of it felt like this. There was a wrongness in the air, subtle, but thick. Like mold you couldn't see but could feel in your lungs. The fear wasn't panic. It was quieter, patient, settling in like fog, and it wasn't leaving. Daniel hadn't planned to open the floor. He told himself it was irrational, dangerous even. But by the end of that week, he was kneeling in the middle of the living room at 3 a.m. Hands shaking, a crowbar gripped too tightly. The tapping had become unmistakable, not random knocks or creaks, but purposeful, rhythmic, like someone gently drumming a pattern waiting for a response. He didn't call the police. What would he say? That his floorboards were breathing. He removed the first panel carefully. Beneath was a dense layer of dust and insulation. He pried deeper, then stopped. Something was carved into the subfloor. Not written, a perfect circle, about 2 feet wide, etched with symbols that didn't resemble letters. It wasn't random. It was meticulous. In the center, a small, square wooden hatch, bolted shut. Daniel couldn't look away. It felt ... familiar, like his body remembered something he had never lived. He should have stopped. But fear and curiosity pulled in the same direction now. He unlatched the bolts one by one. The last one resisted, but with a final groan, it gave. The hatch creaked open, warm. Air rose from the dark. Not musty or stale, but warm, like body heat. The kind of warmth that doesn't belong underground. He lowered his phone, the flashlight on, and pointed it into the black. The beam caught something just for a moment, a face, not fully visible. Only the upper half, eyes wide open, not blinking. Too wide. Too still. He dropped the hatch. Daniel scrambled back, heart hammering in his throat, crawling until his spine hit the wall. For a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't speak, could barely breathe. He didn't sleep. He didn't touch the hatch. Again, the next morning, he tried to convince himself he had imagined it. But the wood around the hatch was warm to the touch, like something still radiated from below. The carvings hadn't changed, but they felt, deeper, fresh, as though they had been recut during the night. That evening, when he returned from work, the hatch was open. He never heard it move. Inside, nothing had changed, but it was darker. His flashlight seemed to fade the longer it shone into the hole, as if the light were being absorbed. Daniel closed the hatch and dragged a heavy bookshelf over it. It didn't help. The warmth persisted. At night, he could swear he heard someone breathing through the boards again, no longer muffled. The fear wasn't just in the sound now. It had taken shape. It had seen him, and it wasn't going back to sleep. Daniel stopped going to work. He told his manager he had the flu, but in truth, he couldn't bring himself to leave the apartment. Something about the place, its sounds, its warmth, even the light filtering through the windows felt like it was watching him, not metaphorically, genuinely watching. He started documenting everything: voice memos, scribbled notes, drawings of the symbols. He bought motion sensor cameras, placed them strategically around the living room, one pointed directly at the hatch. But every morning, the footage was blank. Not corrupted, just empty, like the camera had never turned on. The bookshelf he'd pushed over the hatch began to shift during the night. Just slightly. He'd wake to find it skewed an inch, or the bottom corner off the mark he'd taped on the floor. He checked the apartment for signs of a break-in. Nothing. The windows were locked. The door had no marks. It was as if the room itself had adjusted. The noises changed too, not just breathing now. Scratching, like fingernails against wood. Slow and steady, sometimes stopping mid-scrape. Sometimes pausing as if listening to whether he reacted. His sleep broke into fragments 20 a minute. Bursts between jolting awake, heart pounding, skin clammy. He started taking caffeine pills just to stay functional, but he felt the edges of his sanity fraying. Time no longer tracked cleanly. He'd check the clock and discover hours missing, or seconds stretching far too long. The worst moment came on a Thursday night, during one of those He dreamt, though, it felt re-love, standing in his own living room, lights off, facing the hatch. But the floor was gone. Only a void stretched beneath him, and from it came a whisper. "Let me finish." He woke on the couch, soaked in sweat, and found all the lights in the apartment were off. Every bulb had burned out, including the one in the refrigerator. Even his phone screen stayed black, as if light itself had surrendered. In the dark, he heard the whisper again, not in his head this time. Real. Physical. From the hatch. "Let me finish what you started." He backed into the bathroom and locked the door. There, in the mirror, he noticed something that paralyzed him completely. There was writing on his chest, scratched into the skin, not deep, but unmistakable. A single word: witness. He hadn't done it. He would have remembered doing that, unless something else had used his hands while he slept. And now, it wasn't just the hatch that was open. By Friday, Daniel no longer trusted the apartment tour himself. Every surface felt foreign, like it had been handled in his absence, wiped just enough to keep him unsure. He left all the lights off now, not out of fear, but out of resignation. Darkness had become a constant. It made no demands, only watched. The hatch was open when he woke. There had been no noise, no drag of wood or clatter. Just absence. The bookshelf, once weighted with old novels and college textbooks, stood upright against the opposite wall. The carpet around the hatch was untouched, pristine, like it had never been moved at all. Daniel stared into it, heart numb. The opening wasn't deep, just a black square, where the boards had been pried free. But there was something in it now. A staircase, wooden, narrow. It hadn't been there before. He would have seen it, documented it. Yet now, it waited, angled down into a place no blueprint of the building had ever shown. He descended. Each step was soft, too soft. like the wood remembered being walked on, adjusted to him. The air below was stale, not rotting, just old, unused, but lived in. The walls closed tighter the farther he went, and the noise, he couldn't call it breathing any more, was louder at the bottom. He found a door, not old, not rotted, new, painted white. And on its surface, etched like a signature, was the symbol. The one he'd found carved under the wallpaper, drawn in dust, scratched behind the fridge. Only now, it pulsed slightly with the rhythm of his own heartbeat. The door creaked open on its own. Inside was a room that looked exactly like his living room: couch, coffee table, bookshelf, except everything was reversed mirror, and seated on the couch, facing him, was himself. Not a doppelganger, not a dream. It was him, same clothes, same posture, but the eyes were wrong, hollow, quiet, as if the soul had gone missing and only memory was left behind. The other Daniel smiled. Just once. It was enough. "You invited me," it said in his voice. Daniel stumbled backward, heart racing in terror that felt too familiar, like a loop. His back hit the real wall, and he realized the door behind him had closed. No handle, no frame, just him and whatever this thing was. No longer an idea. No longer hiding. It stood. And the lights flickered. "What we begin," it said softly, "must be completed." And Daniel, with no space left to run, understood. He hadn't discovered the hatch. He had built it. The police report stated that Daniel Whitmore had vanished sometime between the night of July 11th and the early morning of July 12th. His landlord found the apartment door locked from the inside. All utilities paid, no sign of struggle, nothing appeared missing, except Daniel. The hatch had been sealed, nailed shut, floorboards seamless, no indication it had ever been moved. When they pried it open, it led to nothing, just insulation and beams. No staircase, no door, no room. The apartment was rented again, 3 months later. The new tenant, a software engineer named Alicia, moved in quietly. She liked the high ceilings and the way the windows let in the morning light. The building had character, and the rent was manageable. No one mentioned the last tenant. The landlord said he left without notice. Happens more often than you'd think. By the third night, Alicia began hearing tapping, soft, rhythmic, from beneath the floor. She assumed it was pipes or the heating system. But there was no heating installed there. The tapping grew more deliberate. 3 knocks, pause. 3 again, a pattern. She recorded it once and played it back through an audio analyzer, expecting nothing. The waveform wasn't random. It repeated the same sequence Daniel had written in his notebook. She didn't know that, of course, but the file corrupted every time she tried to save it. Eventually, she stopped trying. 2 weeks later, she found a symbol behind the fridge while cleaning. Just a scratch at first, but deeper than dust, almost like it had been burned into the wall. She dismissed it until she saw it again under her bed. Carved into the metal of the frame, she started dreaming of a staircase, always descending, always alone. Each time she woke, her feet were cold, and her hands smelled faintly of ash. One morning, she noticed the bookshelf wasn't flush against the wall, a small gap. She moved it. There was no hatch, but there was a seam in the floorboards, a faint outline. Like someone had tried very hard to hide a door, and almost succeeded. She didn't open it. Not yet. But every night now, the knocking returns. Always 3 times. Always just before she falls asleep. And in the silence that follows, a voice not loud, not angry, just waiting. Like it knows she's listening. Like it's been waiting for her in particular. And far beneath her, in a room that shouldn't exist. Something that remembers Daniel is still sitting on that couch, smiling, because stories like these don't end, they wait.